For those of you who've joined us, we're going to get started in just a few minutes. Hey, Cheyenne, thanks for joining us. Do you want to try your sound real quick?
Hey, good morning.
Hey, you sound great. Thanks. Welcome, everyone. We just want to give everybody one more minute to log on. While everybody's starting to come online, let me just introduce myself and our event for today. My name's Karen Gerwitz, and I am the president and CEO of the World Trade Center here in Denver. Welcome. We are excited to bring this event to you today. It is on the US-UK Free Trade Agreement in partnership with the British Consul here, Aaron Kuhn. I will introduce Aaron, but just in a moment, let me just give you a few housekeeping tips. For those of you on the panel, if you could please turn off your camera and your microphones unless you're speaking, just to keep the distractions to a minimum. And then for those of you who are in our audience, welcome. We'd like for you to submit all of your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. I'll be monitoring that to bring questions from the audience to our various speakers throughout the event. The chat feature, you'll see people starting to greet you and starting to reach out. Feel free to network in that space. Maybe you'll find particular people you know in the attendee list. So encourage you to use the chat feature to do that. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Aaron Kuhn, who's the British consul in Colorado since 2015. And she is a huge champion of enhancing trade and investment between Colorado and the UK, an incredible partner of the World Trade Center. We're grateful to partner with you, Aaron. Welcome.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for taking an hour out of your day to join us to learn a little bit more about the US-UK Free Trade Agreement. For those of you that don't know me, as Karen said, I'm Erin Kuhn, and I lead the UK government office here in Denver. Normally, I'm located downtown. Currently, as you can probably see, located in my home office, as I'm sure a lot of us are these days. I want to start out with a really huge thank you to the Denver World Trade Center, to Karen and her team for partnering with us and organizing today's event. It's always just such a pleasure and a joy to work with you guys. Thank you as well to Americans for Prosperity for joining us and for collaborating with us on today's event. We have a really excellent set of speakers and panelists for you today. I'm just incredibly impressed with their backgrounds. I think you're really going to enjoy their insights and their contributions to this discussion. We're going to kick things off by hearing from Alan Gogbashian, Her Majesty's Consul General based out of Chicago. Alan is one of the senior most British diplomats stationed here in the United States. He's also my boss and a fantastic person. He covers the UK's relationship with the central US. He'll give us an update on where US-UK free trade agreement negotiations stand and answer any questions that you might have. Just a little bit of background on Alan. He was previously Deputy Ambassador to Morocco and Mauritania. Before that, he was Deputy Director for all of the Americas and also Head of International HR. Both of these positions were at the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, which is the British equivalent of the State Department. Before I turn it over to Alan, I just want to quickly kind of recognize and introduce a few other members of our team who are here with us today, and they can help answer any questions that you all might have. So I encourage you to kind of touch on their expertise. We have Freya McKnight, who is our first Secretary for Trade Policy, also based at our consulate in Chicago, just like Alan. We have Jennifer Groover, who leads our agricultural trade policy team at our embassy in DC. We have Carly Graff, who leads on our environmental trade policy work, also at the embassy. And finally, we have Helene Waters, who serves on our British Defense staff as Second Secretary for Capability Coherence, also in DC at our embassy. So again, thank you all for joining us. And with that, I will turn it over to Alan.
Thank you so much, Erin, and good morning to you, those of you who are on Mountain Time. Good afternoon to those further east. It's a real pleasure to join you today from a cloudy Chicago. I'm up here at the British residence on the 60th floor, so quite literally in the clouds as I look out the window. But thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here. My thanks to Karen and World Trade Center Denver, and to Americans for Prosperity for helping make today's event happen. And I'm especially looking forward to hearing from the panelists today about what they would like to see out of a UK-US free trade agreement, because it's exactly that kind of information that we need to hear so we can help inform the ongoing negotiation process and make sure it's an agreement that works for the economies of all the regions of both of our countries. Before I get into where we are on the state of play of the US-UK FTA negotiations, I'll just say a few words on the trading relationship as it stands at the moment, even without the benefits of an FTA. The UK-US economic relationship is truly unique in its breadth and in its depth. We are each other's single biggest foreign investors, creating high-skilled jobs and stimulating growth in our respective economies. Every morning, 1.3 million people get up and go to work for British companies in America, and 1.7 million people in Britain do the same for American companies. The statistics on trade speak for themselves. Last year, total trade in goods and services between the UK and the US was over $260 billion. And if I can bring it closer to home for those of you in Colorado, the UK is, by some distance, the largest foreign direct investor in the state of Colorado and a top 3 export market for Coloradan goods and services. And we estimate that over 20,000 Coloradan jobs are supported by UK companies. And trade between Colorado and the UK, if you look at exports, $1.3 billion of services and $230 million of goods were exported last year from Colorado to the UK. So with all of this dynamism already going on in the economic relationship, why bother enhancing it? Well, I think it's important to remember that the US is the UK's strongest bilateral relationship and continues, and it's important that that bilateral relationship continues to grow in every way, including economically. We are the cornerstone together of the transatlantic alliance. We are each other's closest allies with links at every level of society, culture, and the economy. And a free trade agreement will allow us to grow that relationship even more as we recover together and integrate further as we recover from COVID side by side. And FTA is also important, I think, in fostering the development of cutting-edge technology and leading the world together as we address global challenges like climate change and the challenge posed to the world economy by China. And FTA can also play an important role in supporting our workers and our small businesses. By enshrining protections in a future FTA, we can not only create more jobs, but better ones with higher wages. And of course, this is something that particularly resonates with President Biden's policy of building back better, as we heard again in his speech to Congress yesterday. And as we protect workers and enshrine those protections, we can make it easier for our SMEs to access our markets, including in important areas like government procurement. So all of this can be achieved through an FTA. We want it to be as ambitious as possible. We want it to be comprehensive, and we want it to very much set the gold standard in terms of what an FTA between two countries of this kind can achieve. I'd like to just spend a little bit of time digging down into some of the sector-specific parts of the FTA draft text, which will probably be of most relevance to participants today. So firstly, I think climate and climate action is a really important part of this negotiation. The UK recently completed a comprehensive review of all of its international foreign affairs, its international trade, and its security policy. And it published those findings and conclusions in a public document called the Integrated Review just last month. And that review spoke to many thematic areas, but one thing that was very prominent in the conclusions was a declaration that the UK sees a climate crisis as its #1 international priority. And this will be borne out when the UK co-hosts with Italy the COP26 Climate Summit in Glasgow, Scotland later this year. So we should expect to see climate action supported in the FTA by promoting new job and business growth opportunities in low carbon technologies, services, and systems. And of course, that's again something that the Biden administration is very much aligned with the UK on. I should also add that the UK currently holds the presidency of the G7 and will be hosting the G7 summit in Cornwall, South England in June. President Biden will be attending that summit. And climate action, along with the COVID recovery and vaccines, will be very much top of the agenda at that gathering. A second area of focus in the FTA, which I'd like to just touch on, is agriculture. And of course, we cover, sitting here in Chicago, all of the Midwest, as well as Colorado. So you can imagine that with this region, we spend a lot of time talking to agriculture commodity leaders and farmers. And agriculture is always a potentially sensitive area in any free trade agreement negotiation. Every country has its distinctive food culture. People can get very emotive when they talk about food. Ask any Brit about their fish and chips or their curry, and you'll get a reaction. UK consumer culture is different. It has its quirks. And for close to half a century, it's been regulated, the food has been regulated by EU standards and EU regulations. But it's not as different to the US as the British media, if you read that, might lead us to believe. There's already a good deal of trade going on in relation to agricultural goods between the US and the UK, whether it's Californian wines, dry beans from Michigan for an English breakfast, Nebraskan beef, or rice from Arkansas. And the UK is the top market already for a lot of US agricultural products. And then looking in the other direction, the US is the single largest export market for British agricultural products. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Scotch whiskey comes top of that list. You've got salmon, you have cheese, you have biscuits, and all the other treats that American consumers enjoy from the UK. So it's not a zero-sum game when it comes to agriculture in the FTA. I think both sides, consumers on both sides of the ocean will expect more choice. Both sides want greater market access, and we're working through some of the more sensitive areas including things like animal welfare and protection, to finding an acceptable approach that works well for both sides. Digital is a third area I'd like to mention. It will be an important part of this agreement, with a standalone chapter that maximizes digital trade across all parts of the economy. Digital innovation is taking place so rapidly that it's a challenge for government, of course, to keep up. But both the US and the UK have committed to future-proofing a trade agreement in anticipation of technological advances as much as possible. Both of our countries already are leaders in this area. Colorado is very much a leader in tech, as we know. That's one of the reasons we have an office there, headed by Erin in Denver. Both the US and the UK are leaders in producing unicorn companies of high value, and we hope the FTA will create the conditions to support the creation of many more of those. Business mobility is another important part of this conversation, and it's essential that business professionals can easily enter the US and the UK for temporary visits. Of course, at the moment, with the restrictions we have from the pandemic, it's complicated at the moment, but longer term, our negotiating objectives include an ambition to do something which makes a real change in this area, opening things up, making it easier for business travel to take place. And it's not just business. Our people-to-people links run so deep that there are good cultural and political reasons to get this right. There's a real economic consequence as well to getting this sorted. Economically, we estimate that if temporary entry of citizens from the UK to the US increased by just 10%, then we'd see US exports to the UK increasing by up to potentially $3.3 billion. So the prize is worth it, and we need to get this right. And finally, just in terms of areas to highlight, I'd like to make special mention of SMEs. I know many of you here today represent the SME community, and I know that SMEs really are the lifeblood of the Coloradan economy, and not just Colorado. Trade between SMEs, between the UK and the US, account for 88% of all of that trade. So there's already a standalone chapter dedicated to benefiting SMEs in the FTA. We've got broad agreement already on its provisions, but there's still scope to take it further and to add new benefits in the next round of talks. So I'll just speak briefly about where we are in the negotiations themselves. So we started off negotiating last May. We did it, of course, virtually because we were in the throes of the pandemic at the time. And we managed to fit in 5 virtual rounds of formal talks between our start in May and stopping just before the US elections in November. So in between those formal rounds of talks, we had constant intersessional dialogue going on between our negotiators. And when we did stop because of the election, we were extremely pleased with the speed at which we had made progress. So we had exchanged market access offers, we had agreed the majority of the text and the majority of the chapters, and we were in a very good place. So understandably, things went into hiatus when the election happened. Once the Biden administration was formed, we were waiting for new US Trade Representative Catherine Tai to be confirmed. She's, of course, now being confirmed. And the position is, on the UK side, we are ready to pick up where we left off and to carry on as quickly and as readily as our US partners say the same. So Catherine Tai knows the FTA extremely well. She's been exposed to it through colleagues at the US Embassy before, and through her involvement in the Ways and Means Committee, she's had exposure to it. So understandably, she is now taking stock of what she has inherited from her predecessor. Our FTA is not the only one on her list. And so we are understandably allowing time for all that process to complete with USTR. Once the Americans are ready, we are ready to go at our end. I should say that this agreement was always expected to be a bipartisan agreement. As I said, we hope it's going to set the gold standard for many years to come, and it's not tied to any particular administration. So we don't anticipate any problems politically in terms of a change of administration. And in fact, as I've already touched on, many of the aspects and contents of the draft align very well with President Biden's Build Back Better campaign. Finally, before I stop, just a brief word, if I may, on Brexit. Generally, I'm relieved to be speaking much less frequently about Brexit than all US diplomats have been for the last couple of years. We, of course, have left the European Union. The transition period completed at the end of December, and we were very pleased to see that a trade agreement called the Trade and Cooperation Agreement was agreed between the UK and the EU right before Christmas at the end of last year. So it wasn't a given that we'd have that agreement. We were ready to leave the transition period without one. But of course, it's much better that we have one. It provides clarity for business, and including American businesses with investments in the UK wanting to trade with the European Union from the UK. The agreement is quota-free and tariff-free for goods, and it's the first agreement of that kind that the EU has negotiated. So we're very pleased in terms of what that provides for the trade of goods and the clarity it provides for business. It also has some beneficial provisions for the trade of services. There are still ongoing negotiations for financial services, and we're hoping that a memorandum of understanding will provide further clarity for companies trading in that area. It's quite a complex agreement. There are 19 subcommittees working under it, and that gives some sense of just the scale and scope of its content. But in one sense, we'll be negotiating with the EU forever into the future. It will be incrementally, I think, improved upon. But for now, we're extremely pleased that business has the clarity, particularly when it comes to the trade of goods. So I think I'll stop there, but very happy to take any questions you have. And as Erin said, you are joined by British government colleagues of mine, not only in Denver with Erin, but also in Chicago and at the embassy in Washington, DC. So if there's any areas which touch on their expertise, they'll be happy to answer as well.
Consul General, thank you so much for the update. I appreciate it very much. Really pleased that you all are hosting the G7 too. Denver hosted that summit in the 90s. I was involved in planning that, and it was the first year G8 was part of the summit. I think it was called the Summit of the Eight. And I remember Prime Minister Tony Blair wanting to walk from venue to venue, not take his motorcade, which caused us great angst because he's walking with his jacket over his shoulder in a very casual manner, enjoying our sunshine. But you're in for a wonderful exposure in hosting that summit. And if there's anything we can do to just provide you lessons learned, just want you to know that we've been through it, and it's an exciting time. So congratulations, Karen, for getting that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry Tony Blair gave you a headache.
He didn't give me a headache. It just was a little bit of a security concern, that's all. So
well, I might well come to you asking for protocol tips. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So we do have one question that came in from Angela Hoffman. She's excited the US-UK is moving forward. What other bilateral trade agreements are underway with the UK and non-US markets? And would there be any way to harmonize some of those efforts?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So you're right. US-UK is not the only free trade agreement that we have on the table. And we've just completed a free trade agreement with Japan. We're really pleased with the outcome of that. And in fact, Freya McKnight on the line from Chicago was closely involved in that negotiation. That goes beyond the provisions of the EU-Japan agreements that the UK was party to when we were a member of the European Union. So we're very pleased with that. We also have talks in an advanced stage with South Korea, with Australia, with New Zealand. We're looking at others. including regional groupings as well. So there's a lot going on. And of course, we rolled over 60 agreements from our time in the EU to provide continuity, while at the same time kind of reviewing those to see whether we can go further as well. So the Department for International Trade is extremely busy at the moment in London, and we can expect that momentum to continue.
Fantastic. I wanted to know, maybe you said it and I missed it, but do you have a hopeful timeline as to when this agreement might be negotiated and finalized? Is it hard to predict?
It is a bit hard to predict at the moment, to be honest. I mean, I would say politically, all of the signals are extremely positive, both on the UK side and the US side. So President Biden and Prime Minister Boris Johnson have had an excellent start to their relationship. They've had a number of warm exchanges. Our International Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, has spoken a number of times to US Trade Representative Catherine Tai, including just this week. And of course, the economic relationship and trade comes up frequently. So we know that politically the will is there. When it comes to actual timelines, we don't have a timetable at the moment. As I said, USTR Catherine Tai is taking stock of what she's inherited in her inbox, and we're really waiting for her signal as to when we can start. I think what's important for us is that this agreement isn't rushed for the sake of getting it out the door. We really want this, as I said, to deliver a high level of ambition. And certainly for us in the UK, and I'm sure it's shared by our American counterparts, that comes first beyond speed. So content and ambition will always prevail.
Okay, great. What industries do you think are going to give us the biggest hangups or concerns? I think we might be addressing them today in our panel, but curious as to where you see the big trouble points being.
Well, I mean, first of all, just before the trouble points, what's really exciting about some of President Biden's announcements of his policies, and again, as I said, we heard it in Congress yesterday, is just how much alignment there is. So the areas of alignment are really significant. I think that will give an even fairer wind to the talks. Areas of divergence or challenges, I would say a lot of those challenges aren't provisions of the agreement itself. It's some of the wider trade irritants, if you like, that we have in the relationship. So there are ongoing tariff disputes that we've seen. Some of those are related to our time in the EU that we've inherited, and that kind of tit-for-tat tariff retaliation really never benefits anyone. So we're hoping that those will be resolved as soon as possible, and that won't produce any kind of undesirable backdrop for the FTA negotiation. The same is true for the digital services tax. That's an area where there's currently different positions between the US and the UK. So I think some of those wider issues, which aren't expressly in the FTA, but do provide a backdrop to the trade conversation, we're hoping to see some resolution of those to clear the path. In the agreement itself, agriculture I've mentioned. I don't think it's big news that's potentially sensitive. That comes up again and again in every FTA. And it's something that we are really focusing on and making sure we've understood US farmers and US agricultural commodity leaders, and that their views are very much reflected in our negotiating position.
Okay, perfect. One last question is, do you think the UK will join the CPTPP? And if it does join, then would it welcome the US membership if that becomes politically possible?
Yeah, we've already announced our intention to join, so which I think caused some people to kind of scratch their heads and think, what's the UK got to do with Asia Pacific? But I mean, this really is a sign of the fact that we see the UK as a global player when it comes to trade, and we're not precious or definitive when it comes to regional groupings. We want to be wherever there's UK interests at stake. And one outcome of the integrated review, which I mentioned, apart from prioritizing climate action and the climate crisis, was a geopolitical tilt to the Indo-Pacific for the UK. The US will always remain the UK's #1 ally, But in terms of regional priorities, we are putting more resource and more emphasis into the Indo-Pacific. So that's also partly explains our intention to join that grouping. And if the US would like to join, that's a decision for the US. But certainly having another like-minded country and ally like the US in the agreement, I imagine would be positive from our view.
Wonderful. We have one more question about space and defense, but I think we can hit that in our panel since we're going to be featuring a speaker there. So I want to pause and just say thank you so much for your time today and taking part in this, giving us really the lay of the land. I appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Of course. All right. So we are going to go right into our panel discussion, but let me just open it up. We've just heard from the Consul General of how important this free trade agreement is, $260 billion a year in trade, and also $1 trillion of investment. It's an enormous opportunity for the United States. I think also we need to just note that the UK has got a lot more experience in negotiating free trade agreements than the US does. So we have a lot to learn. The US has 20 countries with free trade agreements, and the UK has 67, plus the EU that they've just negotiated near Christmas. So I do think we need to look at some of the other agreements that the UK has entered. And if we look at the one closest to home, the UK-Canada Trade Continuity Agreement, it's about 20 billion pounds in overall trade. And the benefits basically of that include tariff-free trade on 98% of goods and future zero tariffs on UK car exports to Canada. That's worth about 757 million pounds last year. Without this agreement, there certainly could be a 6.1% tariff on cars that would apply. And Canadian food products such as maple syrup, biscuits, salmon, et cetera, could also have a number of tariffs, 8% tariffs going into the UK. So it's incredibly important for our neighbors in Canada. And I know we have some Canadian consulate attendees today. So I think we can definitely learn from other free trade agreements that the UK has recently entered. Japan as well, we should be looking at that one too. So what is the US-UK free trade agreement? Why is it so important for us? Certainly we talk about free trade agreements in general, giving us better jobs, higher wages, more choice, lower prices, higher standards, no tariffs. These are all things that you've heard with free trade agreements. But this is a stat that I was really impressed with. 62% of all US goods imported in from the UK and 42% of all UK goods exported into the US are used in supply chains. They're inputs into things that we make together. So when you start producing goods together in the manufacturing sector, it makes it even more important to make sure that the inputs can move freely without tariff, because it's basically driving up costs for our manufacturers, which makes them less competitive. And so that's incredibly important and a good reason why we should enter a UK free trade agreement. So some of the things we're going to talk about in the panel today are some of the remedies to address. Those include, of course, regulatory issues, transparency, efficiency, and making sure that trade is proportional. We also want to facilitate trade liberalization with protecting against unfair trading practices. All of these will be addressed in a free trade agreement. We've talked about a gold standard of this free trade agreement, and I'd like to try to dive into that a little bit with our panelists. So I could ask our panelists to go ahead and start your videos and unmute yourself. Let me introduce them while they do that. Cheyenne McAdeffer from U.S. Meat Export Federation is the Director of Export Services and Access. She covers the European Union, Russia, surrounding regions, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Western Hemisphere, not a small territory. Cheyenne worked for the British Retail Consortium as well, so she's very familiar with the market. And she's responsible for providing technical assistance for market access matters, technical development of international marketing materials and programs, and assisting exports with international export requirements and troubleshooting issues that arise throughout the export process. Cheyenne, I know you probably heard it too, the Consul General referring to Nebraska beef. We have to change that to Colorado beef. and see what we can do to change that vernacular. So Stanley Kennedy is also a panelist. He is serving as the chief architect of Redwire and has over 36 years of direct hands-on experience in aerospace engineering. As the chief architect, Stan oversees the development of Redwire's system of systems architecture to support business goals and technology maturation priorities. And prior to joining Redwire, Stan was the co-founder, president, and chief systems engineer of Oakman Aerospace, a firm specializing in digital engineering solutions. Stan also serves on the ITAC committee of the Department of Commerce, and we'll be learning a little bit more about that. Ryan McFarlane, he's director of Crowell and Morning International. He helps clients navigate political and economic barriers in international markets and form mutually beneficial partnerships between the public and private sectors. As a former scientist, Ryan has particular expertise in health, environment, technology sectors. Prior to joining CNM International, Ryan was Principal Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC coordinator for the US Department of State. And finally, my good friend, Franny Matthews, recent Lifetime Achievement Award winner for the Women in Business by the Denver Business Journal. And she also leads our Colorado Technology Association. And Franny spent also 18 years with IBM, serving IBM's Senior Location Executive Director. She also has over a decade of sales management and leadership experience with regional high performance teams. So welcome panelists, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you and learn from your experience. Why don't I start with Franny? Franny, digital commerce, the Consul General mentioned it, is one of the critical considerations in developing a modern free trade agreement. You've brought Colorado companies to London's Tech Week recently, and you experienced firsthand how these two markets can further innovation together. So will you just share your insight as to how the free trade agreement might boost innovation even more?
Sure. And Karen, thank you for having me. I love our partnership.
I did too.
And I love our partnership with the UK. Going to London Tech Week was a great experience. It was an incredibly productive week in 2019, seems like forever ago. But what we found was that there were a lot of synergies when we visited companies and other communities in the UK on how we could work together. So when I look at tech in general, it is inherently globalized, and why it's important to have a healthy global market or marketplace. First of all, it opens up new markets for anybody in tech. There's virtually no company that couldn't stand up the solution in the UK and have a larger scaled market. Also, it inherently, a relationship like our relationship with the UK inherently enhances innovation through collaboration. You find new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things, and that makes all boats rise. It also helps us tackle the talent gap. We have a huge talent gap, and it's a gating factor for tech to thrive in Colorado or anywhere in the United States. And there's some collaboration that's going on where we can really leverage efficiently talent in the UK. Specifically, Belfast has an amazing cybersecurity community. And then, Karen, I'm glad you mentioned supply chain. When we look at supply chain, it is going to become more and more of a network, and what you need is flexibility. And as we apply converging and emerging technologies such as IoT and AI to our supply chain, we want maximum amount of suppliers in, and choice in that. And that's why free trade is incredibly important. So when I look at, the FTA specifically, if we can bring down the hard dollar cost, if we can streamline regulation that further brings down the cost of doing business, if we have clarity. I think with Brexit, that was a great example of the need for clarity. That was very difficult for smaller businesses as it was going through the process. And then I'm glad that Alan mentions future proofing, because we want to make sure that innovation continues and is not thwarted by by agreements that weren't thought through on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Franny. I appreciate it. Stanley, let's continue on with collaboration and talk about the furthering of aerospace and defense sectors and how we can collaborate with the UK. You've certainly been a champion of bringing Colorado cities together with cities in the UK to do just this. So share the outcome of your efforts in building more collaboration, if you would.
Karen, you bet, and appreciate everybody taking the time today. A couple of thoughts and inputs on the discussion. There, especially from an aerospace, being worldwide and the supply chains being worldwide, aerospace is no different than a lot of the high tech areas that Franny talked about. So, yeah, we've been working very closely with UKTI and Harwell, the space cluster out of Harwell and now Cornwall, in terms of how do we bring small medium enterprise together through what's going on in Colorado, what we call Aerospace Alley, and what's going on in those space clusters in the UK. And that's been going on for many years. As you are well aware, Colorado Space Coalition and the Colorado Space Business Roundtable are very active in those discussions. And being able to pull the two organizations, I mean, there's 180 small, medium enterprise companies in Colorado doing aerospace. There's a large contingent, I think the last time it was in the 30 to 50 range at Harwell, and they continue to grow up. But how do we bring those together? And so some of the things we've been working on is we actually have been doing a lot of work with State Department and Commerce Department to get a lot of the aerospace technologies off of ITAR lists onto Commerce Control lists, or EAR 99s. And so a lot of things that we're doing at ITAC, not only in supporting the free trade agreement, but in also being able to support where the technologies that, you want to build high walls around small, real important things, but then get that commercial technology out into the market much, much faster and much easier through the CCL and the EARs. So I think those are key enablers. A lot of times small businesses, when they hear ITAR or Commerce Control lists, they immediately throw their hands up in the air and say, no, we don't want to go into that. We're a 10-person or a 30-person company. We figured out how to move through that. I was the DDTC empowered official. I'm also on the ITAC. But a lot of people don't have those resources. And that's one of the things I think, if nobody takes anything out of this today, but that the World Trade Center Denver works with small medium enterprises to put together things like export control understanding, ITAR understanding, and how to navigate through that licensing process through BIS and other Commerce Department licensing organizations. I think that would be very beneficial. So a little bit of a plug for WTC Denver and the work that you guys are doing. The last thing I want to talk about is we've actually been very fortunate. Our systems are on the Commerce Control list. We have 9D 515, so the 500 series control list for aerospace. We actually have systems sitting in the UK, and we team with companies like KISP and some of the other Harwell cluster teams to be able to share that data. And as I mentioned, aerospace and what's going on in space, not only is it a force multiplier, but it brings a lot of high-paying jobs to both Colorado and the UK. So we're excited to be a part of that process.
Terrific. Stan, thank you so much. And I would welcome the opportunity to go speak to some of your small businesses in Aerospace Alley. Is that what you called it? I think it's fantastic. I'd love to work with the Space Business Roundtable. Vicki Lee's on the call right now. I know she's got a strong connection with the aerospace community. So maybe we can get some more traders not fearful of ITAR and show them the ropes. Would love to work with you on that. All right, let's move on to, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, looking forward to it. And, shout out to Vicki. Her roots are from the UK, and she spent a lot of time championing the same things that we're passionate about. So, keep up the fight, Vicki.
Perfect. All right, let's move to Cheyenne. Cheyenne, free trade agreements result from very complex negotiations, and agriculture is usually one of the most complex. So could you please just shed some light on what are the main challenges that we still need to overcome before this agreement passes in both beef and agriculture?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me here. We are a beef state, as you said, so I represent all red meat, but we don't have access for lamb, and we do ship a little bit of pork, but really all we would need to see out of a UK FTA would be some duty relief on our value-added processed products. So like you said, we're a beef state. I myself am a beef producer out on the eastern plains of Colorado, so we'll focus on that a bit more today. But there are some complications for sure. You know, as Alan alluded to, our viewpoints on agriculture is always contentious in any FTA discussion, but we have some major differences across the pond. Probably the biggest differences with any trading partners around the world. And I'm going to talk about the EU because we continue to follow the EU requirements for the UK. You know, as he mentioned, the UK now has the opportunity to set their own standards, set their own regulations, set their own import requirements, but obviously they rely on their exports to the EU. So how much can they change? I understand that's a challenge for them. And when we look at EU policies and what the UK has had to adopt for the past number of decades, the EU heavily regulates things like animal welfare. They're going to heavily regulate things like sustainability as we start to see the farm to fork policies fleshed out. And they follow the precautionary principle. And on the US side, we really defer to industry-driven commercial standards to drive continuous improvement in topics like animal welfare and sustainability. And I would say on both sides of the pond, we get very similar outcomes. We just reach them very differently. So I think that mindset we'll see within the UK, but I also think that we'll have some opportunities to see the UK branch away now that they have the opportunity to create their own standards. And I think it'd be beneficial for their producers too, if they were able to bring back some of these technologies and production practices that they've had removed from their toolbox for decades and allow their producers to be more competitive. So the Ag chapter will be complicated for sure, but I think we remain optimistic that we can be like-minded with the UK, more so than we've seen with Brussels.
Okay, great. Now, because of this negotiation and the different perspectives on treated meat, whether it's chlorinated chicken or hormone-fed beef, we have a little bit of a PR campaign that we need to run with the British people, right? So tell us what your thoughts are about maybe changing the mindset of the British people when actually eating US beef, chicken, ag products.
Yeah, it's amazing. I never envisioned when we started the FTA discussions that US ag's image would get dragged through the mud so much. I don't know if any of us really expected this. There were obviously pretty powerful forces at play, whether it be NGOs, producer, politician fears, and especially, like you said, hormone beef, chlorinated chicken, those were the taglines. And it's honestly quite hilarious because we haven't shipped hormone beef to Europe in 3 decades, and we haven't shipped poultry in a long time. I don't represent the poultry industry, but my understanding is they don't even really use chlorine anymore. So the fears are completely unfounded, but it unfortunately drug all of US ag's image through the mud. And so even with a favorable FTA, we and USDA and everyone involved, you know, the different trade associations are going to have to do a lot of work to bring that image back up. I mean, the US Department of Agriculture, USDA, they are known worldwide as one of the global standards for certifying safe and wholesome products, not only for our consumers, but we never export anything that doesn't meet our domestic requirements. And we actually, you know, when we look at where we export meat in other parts of the world, we have customers using the USDA certification as a marketing tool to show that this is a high quality and a very safe product. So the fact that we're even having this conversation in this market is a bit frustrating, but it gives us opportunities to go in and talk about, again, we both produce world-class meat products. Yes, our plants are a little bigger, but that doesn't mean that we don't have similar outcomes on how we meet the products. So I'll leave it there. I could go in all day about the safety of hormones in meat, et cetera, but we probably don't have time for that.
I can think of a cheeky ad campaign of having chickens swimming in a swimming pool. Just saying.
Yes.
Yeah, it might go well in the UK. So thank you, Cheyenne. Appreciate you being here. Ryan, let's move to you. With both the UK and US administrations now being really progressive on climate change, do you see that this is an opportunity to start working climate change conversation into this free trade agreement, maybe making it a gold standard for future agreements? What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Karen. And I'm thrilled to be part of this panel. I think there is really an excellent opportunity right now. I mean, we don't know what's in the agreement right now, but we can look to kind of other agreements in the past, for example, the USMCA, to look at that environment chapter to see what types of issues are being addressed. Typically, there are things like IUU fishing, illegal wildlife trade, fishery subsidies, things of that nature. But I think there's a huge opportunity to get at what the Consul General said was the top priority, which is climate change. There's an opportunity, for example, for the US and the UK to work together on environmental goods liberalization and environmental services liberalization. Can both of them work together within this free trade agreement arrangement to then take those negotiations to Geneva and actually make some really significant progress on expanding or developing a list in which countries around the world lower their tariffs on environmental goods? And these are things like solar panels and wind turbines and waste treatment products. And so I think there's a huge opportunity there. I mean, of course, the current TPA language. TPA is a trade promotion authority. That's essentially the grease that keeps these trade agreements going, and it allows essentially the executive branch to negotiate an agreement and then give it to our legislature for an up or down vote. People know that does expire in July, and there's currently a provision there that the USTR should not be working on explicitly on climate negotiations, but I think there's so much that can be done just in terms of facilitating trade and low carbon technologies. And as the Consul General mentioned, with two very much aligned countries working together, I think this can be a gold standard that then goes to other organizations or is replicated in other bilateral trade agreements.
Yeah, I want to stick with you, Ryan. You know, a lot of free trade agreements raise standards in both markets. And you mentioned a little bit of that, but where do you see the US is going to have to improve its environmental standards, or the UK? How do you think we can raise each other's best selves, raise to our best selves? I'm not sure if that's the right expression, but
yeah, I think a race to the top, I think, is what we want. We want a race to the top instead of a race to the bottom. And I think this is exactly what USTR TIE is looking to do. I think it's very telling that USTR TIE's first major policy speech was on environmental issues. And so I think USTR and the Biden administration are going to be using trade to actually elevate those standards. I think a lot of times people will think, oh, more regulation, more standards, that's going to depress economic growth and inhibit our ability to do business. It actually can be quite the opposite. I mean, I think we're finding a lot of countries are actually lowering their environmental standards to get an economic advantage. And so if the US, the UK can agree on those high environmental standards, and they can force other countries to do the same. And so I think it can actually kind of both benefit the environment and benefit economic growth.
Great, thank you so much. Stanley, let's move to you. So speaking of sustainability, you've been really involved in pushing for space sustainability, and especially in the lower orbit where we're getting a lot of congestion. Do you see this agreement maybe addressing some of that for the aerospace industry?
Yeah, I think so. Again, free trade is always encouraged, but it also comes along with setting some of the standards and some of the interoperability constructs. And again, space domain awareness, we're getting large constellations, what's called proliferated LEO going on. That's only going to continue to accelerate. And the sustainability of the space commons is important for everybody. I don't care if it's bilateral or multilateral. If you're going to operate in or through space, it becomes very, very important to have those standards. The standards and interoperability are going to become even more important as we move out from proliferated LEO to the GEO and then cislunar. There's tons of activity going on right now. And I'm not sure how many folks know on the call, but we have 11 astronauts on the International Space Station right now.
Wow.
It's getting crowded up there. Over the next 10 to 15 years, at any one time, the number of people operating in and through space is going to go up from the tens and single dozens to multiple dozens of people with all of the activity that's expected. So making sure it's safe, making sure that it's sustainable, and that there aren't conjunction analysis, which is a nice colloquialism for a space traffic accident. We need to understand how those things work and operate, and so that collaboration across all of the regions and the countries, either bilateral or multilateral, are very, very important.
Okay, thank you very much. Franny, we've all heard of GDPR standards that the EU and the UK follow. The Consul General mentioned there's still some decisions need to be made on the taxation of digital commerce. But are you afraid that if these standards are inserted into free trade agreements, it might be a huge impact on our small businesses? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think just in general, I mean, when I mentioned before the importance of the free trade agreements that, ease doing business. And so part of that is hard cost, and part of it is the cost regulation as well. So, I don't know that anybody in tech, particularly small businesses, would be real excited about, the digital tax. So I'm hoping that works its way through to something that is helpful on, for our U.S. companies to work in the UK. Just in general, I think most small businesses with GDPR, they've already bitten the bullet. And it can be very onerous for a small organization, but we just need to continue to think along those lines. I see some regulation just across the board that is looking at, going after big tech, and the unintended consequences is thwarting innovation in a very, very important segment of our market, which is small business.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Why don't we just do one last rapid fire question of what other things would you like to share about what's important to you with this free trade agreement? What concerns you have about this free trade agreement? Go ahead and start us off, Franny, if you would, on your closing statement.
Well, I would say that, some of it is the flexibility. We didn't really talk about data mobility or people mobility.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be one thing that I would add to that.
Okay, absolutely. Cheyenne, why don't we move to you next?
Yeah, duty-free access for grain finished beef. The UK doesn't produce grain finished beef. We're a niche product. The consumers have proven they wanted it, and we lost our duty-free quota come January 1 with Brexit. We want to push that and an open mind on US production practices and tools.
Okay. Ryan, why don't we move to you next?
I would just say the fact that this agreement could potentially really create a level playing field and actually give businesses certainty by kind of signaling that both of these countries are going to be prioritizing low carbon technologies, providing incentives to develop those technologies so we can move towards a low carbon future. I think there's a tremendous opportunity just given how closely aligned the two countries are. And the only thing that might give me pause or makes me a little bit nervous sometimes is how much the political calendar always weighs on these negotiations. It's not always necessarily the best policy that's made. It sometimes has to be weighed with the political realities.
Yes, absolutely. Stanley, closing remarks.
Yeah, just a couple of things on this one specifically. As everybody's mentioned, the US and UK have a very strong relationship, and that's going to continue. As we continue to work and live in space, on-orbit servicing and manufacturing is going to become more important. But things like the vertical and horizontal launch sites, being in the US and the UK and around the world, and being able to openly share the data, the technologies, and landing rights, just as we do with the FAA for aircraft, are going to become much, much more important. So those free trade agreements are going to lay the foundation to continue that strong relationship that we've developed over the years and just extend it out into space.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for your expertise. I would ask you to just put your note in the chat if you would. I have one last question. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being absolutely likely, 1 being not a chance, like we have a long way to go. Put the number between 1 and 10 to our panelists, where you think, and feel free to engage to our audience. How likely are we to move forward on this US-UK free trade agreement? Just put your number 1 through 10. 10 is absolutely likely. 1 is no chance. Put that in the chat if you would. We're starting to get some 9s and 8s in there. 9.9, 9.5, that's good. Okay. One other question I have is, if the US-UK free trade agreement is adopted, how likely is the US-EU free trade agreement going to come about? Same thing. That one's a little lower. Interesting. All right. Well, we all know that free trade allows us to stay competitive. It strengthens our position against other large free trade agreements like the RCEP that was just passed in Asia. We would welcome a free trade agreement with the UK because they are one of our strongest trading partners and certainly our strongest investment partner. And so I absolutely think that this would be a win for Colorado. Let me turn to Pat McConnell to close us out. He is with Americans for Prosperity. We've been running a Trade Builds Colorado campaign with Pat, and we've got a lot of things that are in the works about other free trade agreements that we're talking about. So Pat, please join us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. And again, it's such an honor to be part of this discussion with such a highly esteemed panel of trade industry experts and really talk about one of the largest and most important economic relationships throughout the world and what a potential free trade agreement would mean. But if we go back just a year, we actually embarked on a new partnership called Trade Builds Colorado, and the purpose is to highlight the importance of international trade to our economic prosperity. And alongside our partners at the World Trade Center Denver, the Colorado Business Roundtable, the Colorado Farm Bureau, the Libre Initiative, Manufacturers Edge, we've helped to elevate this message to our policymakers and our community leaders throughout the state by sharing stories from Colorado businesses, farmers, ranchers about the benefits that trade provides and the impact of trade barriers on our economic recovery. And this year, we're actually putting the band back together. So as you know, Colorado businesses are the backbone of our economy, and trade has long been a cornerstone of our economic strength. But it's no secret that COVID and the ensuing shutdown dramatically altered our economic landscape, and over 9,000 businesses have actually permanently closed their doors. So the challenges we face are evident, but so too are the opportunities, because the fact is that 95% of the world's customers reside overseas. And Colorado businesses, whether we're talking about farmers, brewers, manufacturers, outdoor retailers, they depend on these new markets to grow and expand their businesses, because Trade Builds Colorado and reduced trade barriers can provide a means for our businesses to expand, hire new workers, and fully contribute to our economic recovery. So what we've been doing is collecting stories from all over the state, from businesses that rely on trade to grow and prosper, businesses like Geotech Environmental Equipment, Vollmer Farms, Segrity, and so many others. And what these stories do is they help to highlight the benefits and the impacts of trade policy and where we can go from here. Because we're here to ensure that Coloradans, particularly our policymakers, they realize these benefits and the impact. And here's where we need your help. We need you to help share your story. Help us communicate the importance and the impact of this issue on our economic recovery. Help us connect like-minded businesses, associations, and other policy stakeholders so we can continue to build our network and drive this message. Because we depend on partners like you to help us share this story. By building a coalition of policymakers, community leaders, we have the ability to make meaningful change and help reduce these barriers to recovery. So I just humbly ask that you help us grow our coalition by attending an event such as the World Trade Day next month, recording a video testimonial, sharing social media content, even adding your organization's logo to our coalition list. So again, thank you for this opportunity. Please visit tradebuildscolorado.com. It's tradebuildscolorado.com. Learn more about our efforts and sign up today to join our coalition, because trade matters. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for sponsoring this too. We really appreciate it. And Erin, thank you for being our partner on this as well. And let me just take this time to thank the Consul General and all the panelists today for sharing your expertise and your championship for this free trade agreement. We certainly love talking about free trade and advocating for it. So should you need our support at the World Trade Center to help you in trying to advocate for free trade for your industries, please reach out to us. Until next time, I hope you all will join us for World Trade Day on May 20th and May 21st, or maybe one of our other future events you can find on our website at wtcdenver.org. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye. Thank you.